Welcome to Curito Connects. I'm your host, Jenn, and I've been conversing with friends around the world about life challenges and impactful moments. Conversations on this platform look at answering the questions, how we overcome challenges, and how our experiences shape who we are and the work we do today. I hope this work can inspire you on your own personal and individual journey. Let's dive right in. Hello, my guest today is Melbourne-based Andy Curtin of Kung Fu Komedy. Hi, Andy.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Thank you for joining Curito Connects today. I always like to share how I know my guests, that I invite on the show. So Andy was introduced to me by our mutual friend Tamara. So just giving her a little shout out here. Hi, Tamara. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with both these names, Andy and Kung Fu Komedy, you are in for a treat. Andy started Kung Fu Komedy in Shanghai back in 2010, the year Shanghai World Expo greeted the world, and comedy clubs was just starting to hit major cities around the world, and China at the time had none. And having just graduated from law school, Andy decided to leave Melbourne and live abroad, and little did he know what an adventure he would get himself into. And when I invited Andy on the show and asked him to pick his topic of choice, he settled on wanting to talk about when Kung Fu Komedy was shut down in Shanghai. It's like many entrepreneurial stories, it is never easy to start something, let alone having to close it. So without further ado, I will stop here and let Andy share his story with maybe a joke or two.
Oh, you put me on the spot now.
I did put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm not come prepared for that.
No, I'm just kidding. But yes.
Thank you for having me on. So, where do you want to start?
Well, I would like to start with maybe just a little intro about yourself, because for most of my audience, I'm not sure they're quite familiar with you. So maybe kind of, your early days. You studied law. How did you, you grew up in Melbourne. How did you end up, choosing to go to China of all places? You could have gone to many other countries, and why comedy? Like, how come you didn't want to practice law?
It's funny, actually. Australia has this long history of people in law becoming comedians.
Really?
Yeah, it's a weird thing.
Oh.
Yeah. A lot of very famous comedians have a legal background here. I don't know why. And actually, even in the US, like the Harvard Law Review, so Harvard Law School, SNL, Saturday Night Live,
yes,
famously, like half of their writers are former
lawyers,
Harvard and Yale graduates, and a lot of them come from the law school.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I wonder why that is.
My dad is a lawyer.
Okay.
And he thinks that a lot of the law is performance. And they're very word focused, which is a huge part of comedy.
That is true.
I mean, I'm trying to reverse engineer something here that's obviously there's some correlation, but I'm not unique. I'll say that.
Okay.
Anyway, so I don't know. I also, if you know the Australian university system, law is kind of on this pedestal that everyone tries to do it when they don't know what they want to do. So if you can get into law and you don't know what you want to do, most people will do it.
Oh, okay.
It makes no sense. And it's because it's very hard to get into, but it's something hard to get into because everyone picks it. And there's limited spots.
Right, high demand.
It's this false fulfilling prophecy that you don't find out until you finished it. You're like, I hated that. Also, there was no reason for me to do it whatsoever. So a lot of people then, go to do other things. And I graduated during the GFC, so like mid 2009, when no one was hiring. They stopped hiring. And so there was the whole year level where everyone was like, well, we've got to go find other stuff to do. And I was like, I don't know. When you come from Australia, you're very far away from everything. And I thought, I want to live overseas. I want to live a life where I'm not just in Australia. And if I can't do it now, like when I have no obligations, like when am I going to be able to do it? Right. So I just kind of left. There wasn't a huge amount of planning that went into it. I'd love to look back and be like, here was my calculated decision. But actually, it's just, we're just like running for the exits.
What did you just look at the world map and kind of go well, which country is kind of up and coming, would be interesting for me, right?
I was a little bit more calculating than that. I was fascinated with the idea of learning languages, and I don't know if you're familiar with Edward de Bono, but he coined the phrase lateral thinking, and he had this idea that language is kind of the framework for thinking. But but it's also its greatest restriction because you're restricted to only think within the language that you have. And if you can speak another language, then maybe you can think in a different framework. And,
Right.
and it could have this possibility to really open up your ability to think. Anyway, that's the theory. So I was like, I need to learn to speak a language. So I really, that's when I pulled out the map, and I was like, and I had this idea, I'd learned a bit of everything, but nothing properly.
Okay.
So I'd learned Latin, I'd studied Latin and French and Italian and Japanese, but I couldn't speak anything, I could say hello in like 8 different languages, and that was it. And I thought, I liked French, but French people, there's a lot of people that can speak French and English, it's just kind of a holiday. I thought I should go somewhere where they'd speak terrible English, because if I can speak a little bit of the language, that might open up some opportunities.
Right.
And if I can do a job where I'm speaking the language, I might, be fortunate enough to speak it at a high level. And that all turned out to be true at that time. I don't think it's true. It's certainly not the same now as it was 12 years ago, but that was true 12 years ago for sure. And I thought about Russian and Portuguese in Brazil
Or Portugal.
Yeah, but I think Brazil was more of a compelling... I also wanted to go somewhere where there was like a relationship with Australia. Like if I came back, I was kind of a little bit more career-minded then than I am now. Now I'm just like... now I'm like, I don't care. I want to do something that's fun. But then I was like, let me be, strategic about this. And China was a very important trading partner for Australia. I thought, if I really mess this up, I can go back to Australia and be like, here's this potentially useful experience that I have. And that was pretty much it. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I had no idea. I did like a week of Duolingo or some like basic language course.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think I've got the basics of this language.
Okay.
And it was a real shock to the system arriving in Shanghai in the middle of July 2009.
So you picked Shanghai over Beijing.
I read somewhere that it was like the financial capital. I think that was honestly the beginning and the end of that decision.
Okay.
And I wanted to work in finance at that time as well.
Ah.
And I did work in finance for a few years.
In Shanghai?
In Shanghai, yeah.
So you just...
That's actually how I met Tamara. We were working for a private equity firm together.
Ah. So you just like bought a ticket?
Yeah.
You're like...
I had a 30-day visa. This is the level of planning. Yeah. I was like, I'll go over there and get a working visa within 30 days. That's what I thought.
And that's what you did?
Sort of. Not exactly. I lived off tourist. What I found out is that at that time you could live off tourist visas for like years at a time.
Ah, okay. So can we get like kind of like the Cliff Note version of like then what happens? So
you speed it up.
Because I feel like the juicy part of like the whole learning curve and and what really like hit home for you was kind of like what you built up. Of course, like the process of a fresh college grad moving into a new city and all that fun stuff. I think a lot of people can relate to that storyline, right? It's like and like you said, maybe eventually if this doesn't work out, you go home. But it's like all new, it's fresh, it's fun. You're meeting people from all over the world. You're in a foreign country. And back then, and I can agree to this too, like that was like the fun days, you know? Like
that was a hot time to be in Shanghai.
It was, it was before.
It felt like the best place on earth to be at that time. You couldn't find a person that was there from 2010 to 2016 that doesn't have that same experience.
Exactly.
It was like, wow, this place is really happening.
Yeah.
The country was opening up. Shanghai was opening up. People were coming from all over China to Shanghai. People were coming from all over the world to Shanghai. And it was a happening time.
It was definitely a happening time, yeah.
And in the midst of that, long story short, I got the idea to do a comedy night. And I just asked some funny people to write a few jokes, and we ran a night. We were so afraid to do it, we didn't even invite an audience. We just did it to each other.
Oh.
In a little music bar on Dagaloo, Dagaloo?
Yeah.
Yeah. Called Beatties. And then we invited people, and it was like explosive. We thought we'd get like 30 people in. I think 200 people rocked up.
Wow.
They couldn't get in. The venue could only hold like 100 people. It was mental.
And have you done stand-up at this point before, right?
No, I'd never done it.
And what sparked you to want to do that?
I think I really, a lot of people my age guys especially really loved Eddie Murphy's comedy album Delirious.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I remember watching that as a kid, and I was like, I remember getting to the end of it. I was like, oh, there's no movie. It's just him. That was the whole thing.
Yeah.
I was waiting for the rest of the characters to come out. And I realized you could have a whole show with just one person standing there being funny, and that was like kind of blew my mind. But I think it was kind of a nascent seed buried somewhere in the garden. And then a colleague of mine was like, oh, you should try stand-up, and, you know, maybe that can... And, you know, I wasn't really consciously aware of what was happening in my own mind, I guess, but there was an interest there, and I wanted to do something creative and something different. And there was just this massive hunger for people to see. Comedy had a real place in the city at that time because foreigners were coming in, they were confused, they were stressed, and locals wanted to see foreigners, and it was a multicultural thing. It had Chinese in it, it had China, you know, local people in it, and it just, when in a city with that much stress, laughter is pretty big currency, you know, and
I love
you
that.
you couldn't stop selling tickets. It was the easiest thing in the world to get people to come to shows. We finished the show and everyone's like, when's the next show? And we're like, yeah.
And this is while you were still doing your full-time at the
I
private
was
equity
working
firm,
with Tamara at that
right?
time.
Yeah.
And that was kind of not going great. And for various reasons. And then I had a bad boss and I just had to get out of there. And I was going to leave. And my comedy buddy was like, what if we brought in a professional comedian from America and did a bunch of shows and tried to make money out of it? You know, would that be interesting? And I thought, why don't I just do that as like, I don't want to leave on a negative note.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't I do that as like here's a thing I did while I was there, kind of moment. And I did it, and we made a little bit of money, and it was really cool and fun and exciting, and it just felt like we were doing something that, you know, was exciting, and I didn't have anything else to do. So we ended up doing 2 more that year, and by the end of it, I was like, okay, this is all I want to do now.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I like asking this question because, like, as a foreigner living in China at the time, I'm sure by then your Chinese was like, conversational, right? How did you guys, your team, like, go about figuring out how to establish like a 公司, right, like a company, you know?
Well, we didn't.
You didn't? Okay.
Yeah, it was all illegal, I guess. And yeah, we just kind of my Chinese got to a pretty good level. Like I was touring China as a comedian in Mandarin.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Headlining an hour, you know, in different cities, and
very Lehigh.
it was okay. I mean, do you know what? I feel like I've forgotten all of it now. You know? It's funny because I feel like I can understand it, but when I go to speak, my tongue's just like, nope. No, we're not doing that anymore. But it was, you know, we played a pretty big role in establishing the Mandarin scene, which is now a huge industry over there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are guys like that used to be open micers at our comedy club who one of them sold 16,000 tickets in 2 hours to a show in Shanghai. You know, I mean, they're legitimately like TV famous people.
Okay.
And it exploded out of our tiny little English scene. This Chinese language scene just
exploded.
Yeah, it was like a Jack and the Beanstalk kind of thing.
And were they just like copying the model basically, or like?
Well, we were running the shows, and then they were copying a model that was, you know, around. I mean, they had at some point big financial backers got into the scene.
Okay.
And they were making TV shows. I don't know if you heard of that, like Bilingual Talk Show. It was like an 80s TV show.
No.
They started to put their guys on TV. They started to sign these comedians with 10-year contracts, and they'd make TV shows. And they bought the rights to Roast Battle for NBC. They bought the rights to SNL from NBC, and they were making US like iconic brand comedy TV shows in China. And that was really where, you know, and some of it worked, some of it didn't. But the roast battles were huge, and then they had competitions, and it just, you know, talk shows came out of it, and they were really more a TV production company than
like a comedy club,
than a comedy promoter.
Yeah.
Although they just had a division that handled their live shows. So yeah, it was kind of a beast that came about.
Well, so you started the club in 2010.
Yeah.
And then when did this whole blow up, right? Where a lot of the local scene kind of...
It took a long time. I think I was on the first ever Mandarin show.
Okay.
It was really early. And there was a guy, a Chinese guy who loved stand-up, and he tried to do some English stuff with us, but he was nice, but it just didn't he wasn't really adding value. You know, there's no point in being 50-50 with someone that we didn't really need.
Right.
But you know, we remained friends, and then he sort of disappeared for, I don't know, 6 months or something, and then he came back and he was like, what if I try and do this in Mandarin? And he had some guys, and it was all very loose. He would book us for shows, like I've done shows in the afternoon for government officials at like Communist Party buildings. I've done shows for banquet halls and old folks' homes, and there was just sporadic attempts to do Mandarin stand-up, but the quality of the shows were low, like both on stage and off stage, and it wasn't really doing much. And it's sort of like the English scene was really pumping at that time. We were bringing in a professional comedian every month. We were doing some really big names in theatres. I brought Eddie Izzard in. I brought Russell Howard in.
Oh, okay.
And then some people started to get good at the Mandarin stuff. They could do an hour. They could be really strong. And they were able to start doing shows consistently in other cities, and then a scene in Beijing really got going. And then this production company came in and just basically signed anyone of any talent, just wiped out nearly all of the local promoters except for one, which still exists in Beijing. And that really transformed it. And beyond that, you know, my participation in it was that I would, because I owned the comedy club, so they would, which I opened at some point, and we would have 2 or 3 Chinese shows a week, and I would partner with them and stuff. But you know, it was really beyond.
So Kung Fu Comedy and Comedy Club, it's different.
So Kung Fu Komedy was the brand originally, and then at some point I realized, you know, I was trying to do shows everywhere, and it didn't work. It was too much work to go somewhere and run a show, and it wasn't great.
Yeah, like to hop around the city.
I realized it was better to just have a place. Like people, if the place was good, people will come to you,
and they know to
come.
Said
that to me, and it was like a light bulb moment. I'm like, yeah, you're better off having a place where you get everything right. The sound is right, the lighting is right, the seating is right, everything looks good. People will come to that rather than being like,
I'm doing a show here,
shitty bar that's near them. You know, they're not going to respect it anywhere near as much. So we opened up a venue, and I mean, you know, this is kind of a complicated story, but basically, we were losing a lot of. We flew out a professional and had him living in China, and it wasn't going well. He was an alcoholic, and we were losing money. And I ended up dipping into my financial background, and I raised a whole bunch of money to open a proper comedy club. And I partnering with the venue that we'd been using, and we'd built it. And I went on holiday to Australia for a wedding or something like a week after it finished construction, and the landlord changed the locks on the door, changed the signage, and opened his own comedy club.
Oh.
Yeah. Because he thought it was just all bricks and mortar. He didn't realize that there was more to running shows than that. And he was shocked when, like, no comedians wanted to step foot in the place because of what had happened. But so suddenly we were, like, without a home. And that was a really tough time.
Yeah, what did you do?
I went to the Camel. We were at the back of the Camel, which is a sports bar. It was a horrible place to run shows. And all of the talent started leaving because all of these people had these aspirations of being professional comedians, and then suddenly Shanghai was not a good place to be that. And they just started leaving. So we started losing talent, lost the venue, everything. It was a pretty dark time.
At what point was this? 20, like...
Oh, maybe like 2014 or
14,
something.
okay.
Yeah. It was 2013 or 14. And we lost that venue, and we went into this horrible little hovel of a room above a tiny little Noah's Ark themed bar near
Tianzifang.
Yeah. And then I was about to give up, and just the stars kind of aligned. A guy I used to do shows with was the bar manager at Cartel. And he's like, we've got this big, beautiful space. We want to do something with it. And I was like, oh, man.
You're like, I don't have energy. Yeah, I don't have energy to do this again.
And I had to put all this money into it and renovate it. And my partner at the time, or really the guy I was working for me, was like, dude, I made a financial model. This is like a no-brainer. Like, we'd have to run our own bar, which I'd never done before. He's like, but you'll make so much money doing it. You got to do it. And I think it's more of like a fuck you to the venue that we lost.
Right.
I was just like, I need to not just get defeated like this. And we built this beautiful comedy club. It was amazing. And I think for a lot of people, it's still kind of a legendary place. And a lot of people say it's the birthplace of the Chinese scene in many ways, because that's the room and where it really started to click. And I've been very lucky that some pretty big names now still talk about the history of it, still talk about that room. And it was great, we just, suddenly everything was back on. We were full all the time. We had talent again, and it was a really rocking, that was probably the best moment for stand-up in China, I think.
So that was basically between coming home for that 1 week, returning to Shanghai, noticing that the other place is no longer a place where you thought you could.
My keys don't work.
Your keys don't work. So was that experience basically just kind of like you just let it go, so to speak? Did you fight the guy?
There was nothing I could do. Like, I didn't have any legal basis.
Okay.
It was. We had a contract, but I had no hope that I could go to court and win.
Right.
And pay for a lawyer.
Right.
It just. It's funny because you hear about people having partners falling out. You think, there's two sides to the story and all of that. And we really got blindsided. I think all of the stand-ups did. This was just a very greedy person who, I think he felt like he'd missed opportunities in business partnerships, and he was kind of getting his own back or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it was a thing to go through, and I kind of could talk about it now, because I feel like talking about it then, people just always go, hey, you guys had a falling out, and it wasn't like that at all. But I think it was just survival mode. I didn't see a path to legally winning back the room. I didn't see a path to getting the room back. So I didn't want to lose everything that we had. I just had to find somewhere else to go. And fortunately, the comics that were there helped move it. I don't think we lost a show, even though we moved into a bad room. I found a venue over the phone, got
everyone there,
and we just kept going.
Yeah.
And it was a wild kind of thing.
And it's all within 1 year. That
was a year. But it's funny because a year seems like nothing now.
I know, but I'm sure that 1 year was.
It felt like 10 years.
Right?
Yeah. It really did. Yeah. It felt like a lifetime.
Looking back now, what do you think pulled you through during that 1 year? You know what I mean? Just again, I just think I personally I think of it like when, again, as a foreigner being in a foreign country and having to deal with something like you dealt with,
and how helpless it feels.
Right? How helpless it feels, and it's like at the same time, it's like you're the person that kind of pulled this community together with all these comedians, right? So people are looking to you, kind of going okay, so what now?
I think that's a big part of it.
And you have people rooting, you have customers, right? Fans kind of going well, when's the next show? What's happening?
I still have people message me,
right?
Years after it shut down, being haven't been in a while. When's the next show? And I'm like, buddy, I've got some really bad news for you. You missed while you were living in the jungle.
Right.
The war ended.
So just kind of circling back again in hindsight, because now it's you've probably had time to reflect on it and everything. But what really kept you going? And not saying screw this, I'm just gonna pack up and move. I've had my fun. I thought I was only gonna stay for a year or two, and I've outstayed my time in Shanghai now. I'm ready to go home. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Or was it more you need, you kind of what you said earlier, you've already gone this far and you've built this, and it's well, we're not going to back down just because someone else took that space. We're going to continue.
I think people need a story, and you gotta live a story that is meaningful to you, And when you start to live a story that has some meaning to it, it takes a lot to give that up. And, you know, to be living in a place like China and you know, I'm not talking about how it looks to anyone else. I'm just talking about how it felt to us. You know, we felt like pioneers, like cultural pioneers. We're like bringing this very American art form to China and finding a way that it became a very mixed culture thing. You know, it was in multiple languages. There were different people on stage, you know, and it was, you think about, what do you want to do with your time? What meaningful change do you want to make in your work? And that was like, I didn't have anything close to what that represented to me at that time, you know.
Yeah.
To give it up and do what? You could be a fucking lawyer, like what?
Right.
That's a huge loss. There's a massive incentive to keeping alive that story.
Yeah.
If there seems to be any chance to. And then there's the other side to it. You know, you become a leader against your better will because the people around you that were also kind of living that story are like, what do we do? And you have to have an answer. I mean, it's difficult to turn around to them and say, I don't know. You know, you come up with something. You come up with a plan and you just kind of move forward. And that was it, you know. And I think it's easier in the moment of catastrophe to move forward and come up with a plan. The hard part is like the year later when the plan doesn't seem to be working, where you start to go, I don't know if this was such a good idea. Yeah, you know, but in the moment, it's easy to go, right, we're going to overcome this adversity, this insurmountable challenge is nothing.
Right. I'm going to come back to talking about the club and the success that you had building out the new space. But because there was this other question I had wanted to ask you when we were talking about, you know, when you first started, even back when you just started to meet up with your two other friends to just do stand-up, was like, and I don't know that many comedians, so I don't know how comedians function. But I'm just curious in terms of, because a lot of my conversations on Curito Connects is, you know, more in the self-help, more on the reflective side of yourself, etc. And so I'm just curious, like, as a comedian and the work you do, is there a lot of like self-reflective growth in that process? You know, because you're on the stage, you're cracking jokes about yourself, about people close to you, you know, you're saying all these things, but then once the curtains come down, you know, like, it's not like you, I mean, right now sitting with you, we're not cracking many jokes right now, but you know, it's like,
been really fun.
But you know what I mean? Like, it's just,
this is my best material.
Is it? Okay. Well, you know what I mean? In terms of just like when you go out on your day to day and no one knows who Andy Curtin is, right? And it's like
Batman.
Or Superman.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just, I'm just curious in terms of your own personal growth during this period, and even now, right, in terms of being a comedian and how you navigate that, if this makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few aspects to what you're saying.
Okay.
And I think that most people doing comedy is a bit of a journey of figuring yourself out.
Right. And
people who are very good at it tend to have, on some very deep level, figured themselves out. And that doesn't mean they're emotionally stable. It means there's just some sort of awareness of who they are and what their point of view is. Mm. And I think if you're creative, especially if you're creative with words, the process of being creative involves a lot of time alone, thinking about just seeing what comes up. And if you're a professional talker, you know, stuff that's in you tends to find its way out. Mm. And then there's this weird process in comedy where you think something and then you tell a room full of people and then they immediately judge you for what you were thinking.
Right.
And you have to make a decision. Do I really think that? Yeah. In the face of all these thousands unhappy people, am I committed to this thought that I had? And I think that is, you know, a real catalyst for personal evolution, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, but that's not to say that, you know, many comedians are emotionally stunted in a lot of ways, and a lot of people, I don't know, there's this cliche, there's a conversation in the comedy community often, the question is, are we all broken? you know, and for those that say they aren't, there's just a lack of awareness about how broken they are, you know. And I think I fall on the side of certainly some broken people are drawn to the microphone.
Okay.
And it kind of makes sense because there's so much validation in doing stand-up well. You know, it's hard to explain what it feels like to have 1,000 people in front of you in perfect unison
laughing,
award you with laughter for something you just said.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, it's a very addictive drug. You know, the other side of it is when they don't like it, that's maybe worse.
Yeah.
Maybe worse than the just switching the valence. And so people who have difficulty with their self-worth or whatever, or trouble being alone, that's a pretty pretty potent substance to have access to. But then there's other people that are just funny, and I think there's other people that go to the mic for other reasons. Some people just like the gig, you know. Being a comedian is a romantic idea, and hanging out with comedians and being on the road, there's a real romanticism about it. And I know a lot of pretty level-headed people that are very funny and successful at it. So I think it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
But I do think there's, for nearly everyone, there's like a personal growth that comes
with it,
with the stand-up journey.
Yeah. Well, because I was also curious when you were saying earlier, like when you guys started and having then started inviting, international renowned comedians to China to do gigs. And I was like thinking in my head, like, you guys all kind of just, started at a kitchen table, for instance, and just like crack jokes and wrote jokes.
What we were doing.
You didn't know what you're doing. And I'm thinking, so then how do you figure out, like, invalidation? How do you figure out, like, well, who is a good comedian, right?
Well, it's
the crowd, right? So the crowd is the key to knowing, like, this person's 1 hour set was good.
Yeah, look.
And how do you hone that skill to become better?
This is another one of those forever conversations where, people say this person's funny or this person isn't funny or whatever. And a lot of the conversation these days is, they want more representation in comedy, or they want certain ideas to be spoken about in comedy. And then a lot of people are like, I think we're supposed to make people laugh. I think that's what it's supposed to be.
Oh dear.
It almost gets forgotten
what it is
in the conversations about comedy. But then the other side to it is then there's people that can get laughs, but they're not respected for how they get the laughs.
Okay, got it.
Maybe they're hacky, or maybe they're just flying on the seat of their personality or something like that. But I think after this many years in it, I think anybody that can charge money and walk into a room and make them laugh consistently is doing something pretty special.
Pretty special, yeah. Okay, so then I will now circle back to the club. So what happened after you guys put in the money, built the bar out, had everyone come back to the space, and was able to continually hold gigs, right? And have a community space, like you said earlier, like you have one physical space where people just came.
Yeah, and I mean it really kept growing. We had a YouTube channel called Mama Hoo Hoo. I don't know if you've come across that.
Oh yeah, I was watching it before you showed up.
Oh right, yeah. And that kind of became a whole nother beast. I think that really exceeded the club at its peak.
Yeah, and the reach of audience.
It was phenomenal. And we had US diplomats coming through the comedy club saying that the US government was using our videos to train diplomats learning Mandarin.
Oh my god, that's so funny.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
That was weird. It got weird. Like, I would go home and I'd get recognized, like, in regional Australian towns for videos I'd been in China. And God, walking around Shanghai, I mean, you would talk about having to taste a celebrity. It was like, you just go out and people screaming at you across the street.
Okay.
It was interesting to see what that's like, and so that suddenly fed into more people coming through the club, and then suddenly we just go to other cities and we just put our faces up and then we just sell tickets, and that was, we were like, this is it. We're doing it.
Yeah.
This is taking
This
off.
is our future.
It is, yeah. There was a lot of that. There was a lot of those thoughts.
And then?
Yeah, exactly. And then we were doing shows in, like, I don't know, maybe 40 different cities.
Within the mainland, yeah.
Around mainland China. Yeah. And then touring, around Southeast Asia. And
with, like the Chinese-speaking communities, because there's, like, a lot of overseas Chinese.
I mean, there was an English
It was a mix.
Scene everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, you could go and... Sorry, I'm just going to move a cough. There was... We were performing in Hong Kong, and Singapore,
Yep.
KL, Tokyo, Seoul.
Taipei.
Yeah, I did the first ever theatre show in Cambodia for stand-up.
Awesome.
That was like a little claim to fame. And then Bangkok had a good scene, and then we started doing shows in America and Australia, and I did Melbourne Comedy Festival, and did a couple of months in New York, and it was really kind of just heading in this great direction. And then I started to, China really started to change. And you got the sense that the vibe was like, this is not heading in a great direction. And at that point, I started to get very nervous that I was a dad and of a small kid, and I was a single owner of a business that was very vulnerable. So I decided to sell the club. And that was a whole thing. I went through, I had 3 different suitors, and I was trying to, just...
Pick the right one.
Yeah, and eventually I sold it to Live Nation, which is...
Oh, yeah.
The biggest content producer in the world. And I wasn't trying to throw the hot potato at them, but I thought that they were better placed than I was to weather whatever storm might come.
What's going to happen, yeah.
Like, if they got shut down for 3 months or 6 months, they could handle it. But I didn't have enough money to survive that, and it would die in my hands. So I did that, and they hired me to run their comedy business for Asia. And that was like, I don't know how that happened, to be honest with you. I was running shows for Dave Chappelle, Kevin Hart, like Jim Jeffries. They just handed me the keys to this much bigger operation. Yeah, I remember it was so funny. Like, I remember they sent me down to Hong Kong, and I was a broke comedian club owner at that point.
Right, and you're kind of...
They sent me the name of the hotel, and it just said W, and I thought, what a shitty hotel. It just has a letter for the name. I literally thought that. And I remember walking into the lobby, and I'm like, this cannot be the right place. And obviously the W Hong Kong is a pretty fancy, pretty nice hotel. Yeah. And I was like, man, I may have misjudged this. And it was very Hollywood. I negotiated the contract, but they sat down at this dinner, and they're opening wine bottles, and they just like slid the contract across the table. And I had to give a speech, and they were like, talk about comedy in Asia, and I'm like, oh, we had a busy open mic last night, and the guy before me is like touring the biggest bands in the world, and I was just like, I'm way out of my depth here. So that was good, and then they tried to run it for about 10 months, and the government shut it down. It just got hit. The government marched in one day, they shut a bunch of entertainment venues that had foreigners involved in them down, under the guise of controlling politics ahead of an expo, but really they just wanted us gone. And
this, what year are we in right now?
That was 2018.
Okay.
It was
wow,
October
like shortly
2018.
before COVID. Okay.
Yeah, well,
I mean, like 2 years before COVID.
It felt like a long time before COVID, but it was October 2018, and they made up all these reasons they didn't want us running it, but within a month or two, there was a Chinese group using that club as a Chinese comedy club.
Okay. And you were still in Shanghai at this point?
I was, yeah. I had a year still there almost of trying to figure out... I was still running the business for Live Nation, so I was okay. I was fine. I'd cashed out, so I got very lucky from that point of view. But I convinced them to open a club, the same concept in Hong Kong. I thought it could do really well. We'd go even bigger. Like, open up a bigger venue, do like a world class, like take everything
like in Asia, yeah, and put it in Hong Kong.
Fucking make it happen.
Okay.
All of this, it felt like that was all some sort of a training program,
like
for what we were going to do.
Kindergarten version, and we're going to college, or we're graduated, yeah.
It was time to really
to adult.
do the work,
yeah.
And we built this venue. The day I landed in Hong Kong, the day after I landed, the protests hit the airport. And
so this was 2019, yeah?
That was August 31st, 2019.
2019, yeah. This was the umbrella movement, right?
Yeah, the umbrella revolution.
Yeah, yeah.
And Hong Kong had literally within a week or two of us signing the lease on a place, Hong Kong entered a pretty dark period that it hasn't still to this day come out of. It was like overnight. Hong Kong went from like the Hong Kong that we all knew for years and years and years.
Yeah, and you're like, this is a great place to go
We're like, this is
to. We're
perfect.
gonna like.
It was within weeks of us signing a very expensive lease, and it was just chaos. It was chaos in the streets of Hong Kong at that time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you take your kid down. I got hit with tear gas coming out of work one day. Take the kid down the street. And there was some young kid with a bandana on his face putting bricks out on the road to stop the police cars from chasing after them. And there's a million people protests, and it was carnage in the streets. It wasn't. I didn't feel unsafe, but it was like living in a history book or something. You're like, shit's going down.
This is happening.
Yeah. And in the midst of this all, we're building this club.
Okay, it's still going. You're still going to make this happen.
And we were tapping all these resources we'd developed over the years. Like the people that designed it were the people that designed the liquid laundry in Shanghai.
Okay, yeah.
An awesome venue. And we built this beautiful room. And to get a performance or a liquor license, the police need to come in. And the police were saying, we're too busy in the streets. We can't check it for any liquor licenses. And so we had this club just sitting there.
Like it was done.
It was finished.
Yeah, but it was couldn't get approved.
Literally finished. And we would just hang out on the weekends. We'd go and have a drink to this beautiful bar by ourselves. And then it opened finally in January 2020.
Okay.
2 weekends, and then COVID hit.
Mm-hmm. And it was called Comedy Club Hong Kong?
It was called The Riff.
The Rift, okay.
Yeah, and it opened for 2 weekends, and then got shut down.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, it was an incredible sequence of events. And they spent like $1 million building it. It was just dead.
Is it still there right now?
No.
So what happened? Like, so COVID. So, I mean, everyone's COVID story is same.
So COVID hit Hong Kong and they shut everything down. But Hong Kong actually, I just happened to be, so it always happens when I'm away. But I just happened to be away.
Don't go away.
Yeah, I went away and they were like, we're canceling the shows this weekend. There's a virus. So I was like, again, I had 2 kids at this point, and I was like, Hong Kong looked pretty shaky. I was like, maybe we'll just push our flights back in Australia and we'll ride it out. And I ended up staying in Australia for I think about 7.5 weeks until COVID hit Australia. And then Australians were like, this is fine. I'm like, you're all going to die. At least people in Hong Kong are like
masking,
wearing a mask.
Yeah.
So we raced back to Hong Kong like a day before quarantine was implemented.
Yeah, this is like March by then, right? Like,
yeah, I think we got back a week before they implemented quarantine.
Okay, yeah.
And Hong Kong got in control of it, and we opened up the venue. We couldn't fly anyone in, but we ran shows, and it was people needed to laugh. It was a stressed out time.
Yeah.
There was a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talent in Hong Kong, and we was like we couldn't stop selling out shows.
Amazing.
It was a hot time.
Okay. That was 2020.
That was in 2020. And then they got 4 or 5 months in, and then the COVID hit again.
The lockdown.
Yeah.
So how did you wrap that up in terms of?
Well,
again,
I got fired.
like. Oh, okay.
Yeah, everybody got fired. Almost the entire Asia business got fired. Live entertainment got hit harder than the airline industry.
Right.
You know, like Live Nation's Q2 revenues in 2020 fell 98%.
Ooh.
Their revenues fell 90%. Not their profits, their revenues fell 90%.
Right.
They were a business with a lot of cash that got absolutely creamed in what was happening. And they just had to cut off arms and stem the bleeding, and they were basically in triage trying to rescue the core business.
Yeah.
And we all got caught in crossfire. So there I was in Hong Kong, and I developed a reasonable name for myself in the industry at that point. And I got picked up by one of our competitors and started working for them for a few months. For 8 months I did booking shows, but not able to run them, just planning for the future kind of thing. My competitor had this real big plan to take on Live Nation's Asia business once things opened up. And then I got a phone call from Live Nation Australia saying, do you want to come back? we'll fly you to Melbourne and you can run Asia, Australia, New Zealand, all of it. And I was like, yeah, I think I can do that.
Yeah. So that's where we are now today.
That's how I got back here.
Yeah. And so far, so good.
Yeah. I mean, look, the kind of the sad thing is that in COVID, I lost performing, and I don't think I'll ever get back to it.
Oh.
Which is creatively, it feels like a huge loss.
Yeah.
But I'm super grateful. I mean, I feel like I also won the lottery alongside that. And I can't overlook how lucky I was through all of it. And there's plenty of things to be happy about. So, I enjoy that. But I do, I'm now running shows for other people, and it's a weird, life has a weird way of twisting the knife a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, I think so. Wow, what a journey the last decade, huh? Like just listening to what you've gone through and where you are now. It's a lot.
Yeah.
I'm just going, oh, I'm taking a big sigh.
I feel like I skipped a lot of the difficult parts.
I think it was quite illustrated in the storyline. I feel like we did cover. I mean, I think listening to the different things the different points you hit, it's like you can imagine, the emotions and the stress and the anxiety of what was going through your mind, and what was, and like you said, you had a small family that you're supporting. And it's kind of like, well, is this the environment I want to be in to raise my kids?
Yeah.
What does the future in this environment look like?
It kind of went from being a fun place of hope to an unfun place of not a lot of hope.
Are a lot of the people you built the comedy club with in Shanghai at the time, had most people left?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, I was in New York last week. And a lot of them are professional comedians now in the US.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. There's this weird history that a select few comedians have of having started out in Asia. And it's funny, I've had someone the other day in Chicago reach out, and they're now working as a comedian, and they said they started there as well.
Yeah.
I didn't know them that well. But some of the guys I started with are still doing it, and now I'm looking at how I can work with them as a promoter. Yeah,
and I'm just thinking out loud, and I do this often when I have conversations with people too. It's just, I almost imagine down the line you could kind of do a reunion. How fun would that be?
We did. We sort of did. I was in New York, and we went out and had a big dinner, and there was 5 of us.
Yeah.
But
a reunion show.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, the reunion part, of course, as human beings, we're all going to reunion and hang out with each other. But kind of you had mentioned, I don't know, for 30, 40 minutes into the conversation about how people still talk about how you guys are the pioneers, right? And you guys built this space. And I think a lot of people are very grateful and thankful that's where their career started. And so it'd be super fun, to see, and like you said, as a promoter now, be able to pull this and it kind of bring all that.
Yeah. Well, I think also there's beauty in that story.
Yeah. And
Alessio, who was the genius behind Mama Hoo Hoo, he has a whole other story of what he did. So long story short, he was a filmmaker in China. He was still there at the beginning of COVID, and he had 2 kids, and he was like, I'm not risking this, and he fled back to his home in Scotland. And he comes from a remote island called Arran.
Okay.
It's a rural
area. Yes. Okay.
In Scotland. And he really started missing what he used to do.
Yeah.
So he started making funny videos. And there were no actors. So he had his family in it. He's 36-year-old dude.
With 2 kids.
With 2 kids making funny videos with his sister and his mum and his brother, And the BBC started picking him up. And they were getting tens of millions of views.
Oh, that's awesome.
On his videos. And then the BBC gave him greenlit a pilot. And he just released a pilot on TV. For a comedy series starring his brother.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
And they're now making it.
That's awesome.
Shooting a TV series.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So I kind of think that the guys you need the storytellers to... It does. I do wish it was captured somehow. The story doesn't just get forgotten.
Yeah.
And you need people like Alessio to really try and capture the story. And he's made a few things over the years that sort of captured stuff that we've done that, you know, like you go back to any time and be like,
yeah,
look at that thing that happened.
I can totally see something coming up down the line, though, of you guys kind of pulling something together again to really retell the story.
Everyone sort of likes the idea of building our own little careers and seeing how they connect.
Yeah, and I think that's really cool. So we're running short on time, and normally I like to wrap up by asking the guest, you know, so what would you tell your younger self, you know, now that you know and what you've gone through, or just other people who are listening to your storyline and kind of resonate with this, in terms of, you know, the lessons you've learned, obviously, and kind of what are your 2 cents. And we had talked about this earlier when I kept asking you, like, well, when you were going through these things, what really kept you grounded or what kept you going forward in terms of like wanting to continue to do this and not call it quits? You know, and for some people, it might be like the books they read or like some mentor they had that like really, you know, talked to them and encouraged them to keep going. Or maybe it's like the other comedians for you, you know, like your friend group, etc. Or the audience, like you said, you know, the audience is a big part of why you guys kept doing what you're doing. So these are like usually my 2 questions before we wrap up the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, I kind of feel like the stories have to, you know, become themselves. You know, I don't know, there's like, what I would say to my younger self, I'm not trying to change what happened, you know. I think I knew everything I needed to know at the time. But I've meditated a lot, and that's been great. I think just trusting your instinct is a pretty important thing. And even if your instinct is wrong sometimes, you kind of train it up a bit by letting it be wrong.
Yeah.
And instinct is a pretty powerful guiding tool. And then the other thing is just, it's really all of this shit, it's just about people, you know. Ultimately, that's the biggest thing that we all get out of it. And, you know, being good to the people, remembering, you know, who matters and being there for them and all that sort of stuff was, I think, the best stuff that I did, I guess. I don't know. I don't feel any great desire to go back and be like, I wish you knew this. You know?
Right. Or like, I guess another way to put it is like when someone, you know, again, maybe it's like just fresh out of college, you know, and they're like, hey, Andy, so like, it was super cool that you did that. And I'm thinking of doing something similar.
Just fucking do it.
You know, and then kind of like looking at you and saying
stop
like.
wasting time talking to me about it. Get started.
Just do it.
Yeah, like.
Nike's best slogan ever.
People love to sit around being like, what if? It's like, do it or don't do it. And
don't talk about it. Just do it.
Just start. Be wrong. You know, I think high schools in our time insufficiently prepared people for life. You know, there was this idea you got to find one thing and do that one thing, and I don't think life is like that at all. It's a series of connecting stories, and just get into it. You know, I don't want to like wax lyrical like I'm fucking some philosopher, but certainly if someone asks me, and I do get asked if I should do something, I'm like, do you want to do it? Do it.
Yeah,
that's the answer.
Yeah,
wanting to do it is the answer.
Correct. Yeah, you either like it or you don't like it.
Yeah, well, you're gonna find out if you go and do it.
Yeah,
and
that's
then
right.
You don't do it if you don't like it.
That's right. And then the second question of like, you know, you said you meditate. Was there, you know, particular podcasts you listen to or like books that you like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's an amalgamation of stuff.
Of course, yeah.
Sort of lessons kind of have to be learned at the right time.
It's like timing, yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
Sometimes you don't hear what is really being said.
Yeah, you're not ready yet.
Yeah, I believe in all of that. But I think what I would say, rather than reading or listening to anyone in particular, is just to read. You know? If you read, I try to read consistently, and the lessons will come out of it.
Yeah.
You know, you'll find the lessons that you need to hear if you read. If you sit there and sit on Instagram and you don't read, you're missing out. that good advice that's going to help you think differently and navigate whatever you're trying to get through.
Is there any particular book that stands out to you that you particularly resonated with, like that you like?
Oh my God, a million books.
I know so many, right? For those who read, but just out of curiosity, if you just met someone and you'd be like, oh, you should read this book. It's actually like, quite empowering, or really resonated with you. And yes, there's many books.
I don't know. Like I definitely enjoyed Eckhart Tolle, but I feel like it's too much to throw at someone. It's like, hey, we just met. You should read the Bible.
Yeah.
And there's a lot in there that don't need to be there for. And I don't know if I'd force that down a stranger's throat.
Right.
But it certainly had a huge impact on me in thinking and navigating stuff.
Yeah.
And I just think worrying, I guess, like, I really like Sam Harris. I like a lot of what he's done.
Okay.
And he sort of has this idea that you are not your thoughts. I find when I'm stressed out, the voice in my head will say, oh, you're sick, or you're overwhelming, or whatever. And I'm learning to just let that voice speak without taking it on board is a pretty powerful tool for getting through stuff.
Yeah.
To realize that your body is going to internalize and say things to you that you don't really need to listen to. It's just It's like if your arm is tired, it's going to feel a certain way. It doesn't mean your arm doesn't work anymore.
Right.
And your brain kind of works like that as well.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, totally agree.
And having those tools, I think having a good base program to go back to when life is difficult, be it, looking after your own biology, sleeping, getting up, eating properly, and all of that. When times are difficult and you can fall back on good habits like that, you'll find it a lot easier to get through difficult stuff.
Yeah. It's true. I agree. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story. I don't know if there was any last minute things you wanted to share before we bid farewell,
I just really appreciate having me on. It was very nice to chat.
Oh yeah, thank you. And so is there anything I can link people to follow, like the shows you're promoting? Is it just the Live Nation?
Andy Curtin, my Instagram, I put all the tours that I'm promoting.
Okay. So then I can link that, and so people can kind of follow and see what shows are coming to their cities, etc.
I am secretly working on a blog at the moment.
Secretly? Okay, we'll secretly add that later.
But I don't know, I'm sort of doing it it's kind of what we're talking about, is like, I'm trying to just get all these stories down before I forget them.
Yeah.
I'm not too worried about, there's some people reading them, but I'm not too worried about that. I just feel this, it's like coming out of me, to get it down.
Exciting. Yeah. Well, looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening to Curito Connects. For more Connects content, collaborations, and discoveries set to inspire you on your own individual journey, please head to our website at www.curito.co. Until next time, stay inspired, and thank you for joining us at Curito Connects.